All right, thank you so much, Lori, and thank you everyone for joining. I know it's an interesting day for a webinar for a couple reasons. Hopefully, Lori's festive music got the attitudes right, and I don't know that it'll be that spooky or thematic, but we'll try our best to make it exciting. And the other reason, of course, as some of you who are involved with NTD reporting know, is it's a notorious date for some transit agencies whereon the NTD annual report is due. So I know some of you might be multitasking, but we wanted to start off by saying we really appreciate everyone here for joining us. And I will say I think we'll have a very eclectic group in terms of involvement with NTD data, just based on the names and email addresses I saw. We really want to make it useful for as many of you as possible. And for that reason, what we're going to cover today is, I think, scratching the surface for NTD data publications, but hopefully pointing you in the directions that you want to go. Our goal, as you hopefully saw in the description of the webinar, we're hoping to provide a high-level description of the annual data that's in the process of release from 2022 report year. We have a number of important updates we want to cover. We have a number of exciting changes we want to cover related to that annual data release. So we're gonna do that a little while later, and that will include hopefully a demonstration of how to access some of that and other data from the DOT Open Data Portal and FTA's NTD program website, and then finally a summary of the NTD data release schedules. Again, the intended audience is any data publication users. So hopefully that includes yourself. And hopefully if you're using the NTD data or even want to use it, want to get familiar with it in some way, you'll benefit from the webinar. A few things we're not going to cover today. We're not going to go in much depth on data definitions. We're going to talk to you about how you can access those. We're going to talk to you about FTA's. We're not going to talk to you about FTA's data collection policies and reporting procedures. We'll speak in general terms about what types of data FTA collects. We're not going to do our own quality assessment of the data and publications. We'll point you to a couple of resources that might help understand the quality of the data a little better as well. We're not going to be bothering interpreting trends or doing our own analysis. That's the role probably of many of you on this call, and we really appreciate and value the work that you all do. And then finally, we're not going to attempt to identify all the potential uses of the data, including all of the data users. So here's a rough agenda of the points we're going to cover today. And my information is here. So I'll give a quick introduction since I didn't do that a moment ago. My name is Joe Eldridge. I've been with the NTD program in various capacities now for a little over 10 years. I've been in the transit industry for almost 15 years, but I guess just over 14 years. And have been really grateful to get more involved over time in this data publications process. So I manage the small team that is responsible for producing the NTD data publications, and also liaise closely with the Federal Transit Administration NTD program managers. We'll have their contact information on here in a second, but it's a big operation that involves a lot of people. So I'm definitely happy to play a role kind of coordinating with many of those people. Our help desk information is here. And then our panelists today, as Lori mentioned, are the technicians who actually produce a lot of the files that I'm going to be demoing. So if you have questions, you have them in the chat. You have the Q&A, as a great resource to ask Todd and Amanda questions. So I definitely encourage you to do that. And hopefully my audio is okay. Okay, thank you, Lori. All right,
That's fine.
Thank you. And then the FTA program contacts I mentioned here, we have their email addresses. I don't believe any of them could be on the call today. One or two might be in in the audience, but these are the folks within the federal government who are keeping the NTD program moving and who act as the points of contact for any major questions you might have, or curiosities about the kind of method behind FTA's data collection and the legislative basis of it. All right, so I'm going to take a breath there. We're going to start with just a quick introduction to NTD data publications. So what are we talking about when we're talking about the National Transit Database and the data it publishes? So this is the data that comes into the National Transit Database application submitted by transit agencies all over the country and is approved for release by FTA. So most of the data that FTA collects in the NTD, almost all of it gets released in some form or fashion in a data product. These data are open data under the U.S. Government public domain. The data publications can vary in their type. They might contain a single, what we call report year worth of data, or a time series that's several years of data, or several months of the year, going back many years. So we're going to have examples of that in a moment. I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but again, NTD data is collected through an online reporting system. It is a federal mandate for some transit agencies receiving certain types of FTA funding to report certain data. And the rules that determine what gets reported and by whom are shared in NTD reporting manuals. There are many other opportunities for those of you who are NTD reporters. We've just got through our cycle, kind of 2023 cycle of trainings for annual reporting. So hopefully many of you got to attend those, but if you didn't, a quick plug for NTI. A lot of the webinars are recorded and available if you need to see some of that reporting instruction. I see the nod from Lori as well. So we can provide the link to you from a prior webinar if you're more interested in the reporting side of this equation of reporting rules. But the rules are really designed to eliminate differences in interpretation by the different transit agencies who are submitting, and therefore provide a standardized data set. After the data are submitted, FTA is going to continue to review those, namely NTD validation analysts will independently review the data and just make sure at a high level it is valid. And Lori just put the webinars link in the chat, so I would encourage you to check that out, those of you who might be interested in the reporting side or just in general. So what is the goal of publishing this data? Well, again, other than complying with federal mandate, the Federal Records Act defines which data needs to go out into the public and how. But the transit industry, academia, the press, and the public need to understand key aspects of public transportation for a variety of reasons. So the function is to answer basic questions and allow for further analysis. So some of the questions that you might be interested in trying to answer with NTD data products are listed here. I'm not going to go through them, but at the very bottom, I'm pointing out that the list goes on. This again scratches the surface of what you could do with an NTD data product. And we'll find other use cases just looking through it today. But it's really meant to be a resource to answer this type of question about public transportation, which is also defined in federal law, and the NTD is the most consolidated and nationally recognized data set in terms of presenting data on public transportation. So the data is going to be released in two places. One is FTA's transit.dot.gov website, and you'll see that on the left here. The NTD data on the left navigation pane drop-down will present a few options: NTD data reports, transit agency profiles, single summary transit, and census updates. So that blue arrow is pointing to where you should click to get into the NTD data from the home page. The DOT Open Data Catalog is also going to present NTD data. In addition to other data submitted by other federal agencies into this portal, FTA is presenting NTD data, and the public transit icon in the bottom left there is how you'll access that. So a quick kind of housekeeping on how often FTA releases NTD data. The Federal Transit Administration will release data on both an annual and monthly basis. Release meaning published to those sites that we just saw. The release frequency is going to depend on the type of product. We're going to talk a little bit more about the product type in a couple of slides, I think. So the data submitted in annual reports is going to be released in the fall of the following reporting period. So that's why right now we're talking about the 2022 annual reporting data release, because we're in 2022 report year plus 1 year. We're in 2023, the fall right now. So that is what we're working towards publishing, was all the data that transit agencies collected and submitted for their fiscal years in 2022. And that process took place over the past year of reporting, validating, and now we're at the end of that, publishing out. The monthly ridership and service data is released shortly after it is submitted. So there's a deadline for the reporter types who are required to submit that data set of the end of the following month. So if I am New York City Transit, I have my unlinked passenger trip data, my vehicle revenue miles data ready to submit for October of 2023. September of 2023, around now, at the end of the following month. So September 2023 data due at the end of October, and then FTA will release that data set basically as soon as possible afterwards. And we'll talk about a couple of the kind of challenges of that velocity of reporting and how FTA addresses it in a bit. So the monthly safety and security data has a little bit more of a runway in terms of publication than the service and ridership data, and that's released 2 months after it is submitted. Generally, that's going to be 3 or sometimes a little bit more months after the month of the event ends. Typical release date ranges, to be more specific, for the monthly and safety and security, those updates are going to happen within the first week of each month. So the release that FTA is preparing for next is sometime early next week, basically. That will be the November data release. And the same thing will happen again in December. So near the beginning of the following month is when those data products will get refreshed, and the new month's data will be appended to them. The annual data products, again, fall of the following calendar year. I think we talked about that in enough detail. We'll have an example here. So this is just a little bit more detail about why it takes that long. So a transit agency will submit its fiscal year 2022 data to the NTD. So this is, for example, in April 2023, 4 months after its fiscal year ends. That's not going to be the same for everyone. There are different fiscal years. That's not one of the uniform reporting requirements, is not you have to have the same fiscal year. Quite the contrary. So there will be different data collection deadlines for the annual reporting throughout the year. And April 2023 happens to be the last one for the 2022 data set. So after that, there's a validation and closeout cycle that happens in early 2023. And then after that, FTA develops and checks the data. And that's why we're ending up with now at the end of, close to the end of 2023, when we're releasing the 2022 annual data. The monthly ridership data, on the other hand, again, is a lot more agile. I gave the example there already. The September 2023 data will be submitted by the end of the following month, released in early November. safety and security data. This is a more complicated example. So in this case, safety and security, one of the aspects of data collection is major event reporting. So if a major event occurs, let's say it's a collision on July 15th, 2023, the deadline to submit the details regarding that event to FTA, the transit agency's deadline would be August 15th. So within 30 days of the event. Then 2 months of review will happen. So, and that's not just 2 months to review this single event. It's 2 months to review every event that's happening in that time period. So that's why it might seem like a long time. It's this validation process that happens kind of in batches or in cycles. So that 2 month period ends October 15th, and then the next release after those 2 months passes in early November. So we have an event that occurred in July, and it doesn't show up in the NTD data until November 2023 at the earliest. Hopefully that makes sense. The time frame on this for this one is a little bit different because some of you who are using safety and security data, you might be more interested in that specific event date. Whereas for other data, the NTD doesn't get that granular. It's either by month or by year. But those events are going to appear in data products along this time frame. So hopefully that makes sense. That's basically the end of the release schedule part. Again, if you have questions about that, I really encourage you to ask them here. It can help you get used to that kind of data flow, reporting outflow. NTD terminology is another obstacle that you might face if you're new to the product. Just kind of a crash course is all we want to provide you with here, is all we're going to be able to do today because there's so much of it. There are several resources at the end of the presentation that will help you get more acquainted with these terms. But for now, why does this matter? Well, it's really so you can get to the right place and also to avoid misinterpretation of some of the data that you're going to see right off the bat. So we're going to go over these terms. Product type might be the most important one for our discussion today because it's going to define what the general data product includes. So we're going to classify what FTA publishes out into 4 product types. First is the database files. So these are less processed annual data that comes right out of the NTD. Basically, the only processing that is done is some transformation to make the names of fields a little bit more transparent. And it requires more of an understanding of the caveats in NTD reporting requirements and the constraints on the data. It's going to be very disaggregated, kind of at the lowest level of reporting, the lowest level of reporting with the highest level of detail. So there's a database dictionary reference that goes along with this that we're going to look at that's really critical if you're using these files. The time series is quite the opposite. It's aggregating along very specific data points, very intentionally showing trends as far back as achievable to allow for time series and trend analysis. And it's usually along month, if that's provided, or report year. So there are annual and monthly time series being released by the NTD on the respective clip, annual or monthly. Data tables. So the data tables are going to organize and summarize from the database files or the monthly reports in a manner that's more useful for quick reference. So this will take out some of the work that I described with the database files where you need to go and reference a dictionary to understand, what you're looking at here. We are still going to, talk about the data definitions in each case, but in 2022, these are going to be available on the open data portal where further grouping or analysis is made. more useful for those of you familiar with visualization tools and or those of you who want to gain access through an API. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. The transit agency profiles. So this is kind of a spotlight of each transit agency submitting to the NTD. It pulls out a few key data points for each one. We'll have the link to this in a little while. These are useful to understand transit at a glance in a certain area or provided by a certain transit operator. It might also be useful to group those operators if you already have a peer group in mind to compare kind of the output of those along some key metrics, cost metrics, cost efficiency, service efficiency type measures. So another term that I've used already several times, and apologies for kind of getting ahead of this, but reporting year, basically that's a little bit of a misnomer. Year can either reference in the given file, it can reference the reporting year or the calendar year. In monthly data publications, it's almost always going to be the calendar year. So unless otherwise noted, when you see 2023, we're talking about the period that started in January 2023 and will end in December 31st, 2023. In the annual data publications, year is a little bit more elusive. It's a report year. As I mentioned, agencies can have different fiscal years. So when you see 2022, it means the set of fiscal year 2022 for each reporting agency or reporter. So as you see here, that could be July 1st to June 30th. It could have been October 1st, September to September 30th. And we try in the NTD avoid using 2021, 2022 to describe the fiscal year 2022. Because for some, that is not the case. The entirety of the fiscal year would have occurred in the calendar year. So that can get a bit confusing, but there is a file, the agency information database file will define when the fiscal year starts and ends for each NTD reporter, and that's a good reference to use. Agency name is just the legal name of the entity reporting to the NTD. Some of the names might seem a little strange, and that's because it's how they are recorded in sam.gov, which NTD uses the API from sam.gov to basically identify who the business entity is providing transit service in the cases where that's possible to do. So for agencies who have an account in that rewards management system. UZA, so that's another term you're going to see a lot to kind of describe the operator. That's urbanized area. That's where the given transit agency primarily operates. And then UACE, you're going to see that code more frequently in NTD data products moving forward. That will just uniquely identify that urbanized area across decennial censuses. For those of you who are interested in trend analysis for specific urbanized areas, it's a consistent code that you can use further back in time. All right, mode and type of service. So a lot of the data is organized or reported by mode and type of service. So a mode, in this context, we're not talking about like what mode of DOT, we're talking about a system for carrying transit passengers described by right-of-way technology and operational features. So bus is a classic example of mode in the NTD. Bus rapid transit is another mode. Those are both fixed route modes that differ along the technology used in the right-of-way. Heavy rail is an example. Heavy rail is generally the subway systems in larger urban environments. Type of service, that describes how public transportation services are provided by the agency. So how the agency has determined to provide it, whether directly operated or purchased transportation. And there are, within purchased transportation, there are a few different types. depending on the type of operator. If it's a taxi cab operator, for example, it will show up as taxi in the type of service category. These are often presented as two-letter acronyms. So this is a reference for you as you use the data products. This should also be appearing in the data publications guide. It can be a good reference to crosswalk when you see this acronym in a product, which we will see later on. And then finally, reporter type. So this is an important term because this describes how much data is going to be available in the given file and was required reporting by each NTD reporter. So agencies that have a type of full reporter operate more than 30 vehicles in maximum service, and they are the only reporters that submit monthly data, so data that appears in the monthly product types. The annual data publications guide has detail regarding which reporters appear in the annual product, and I'm not sure what happened to that slide, but I will hopefully recover it. I really don't know. That's going to be a useful slide to cover. I think it must have just been moved further down. Let's see. So I will. Yes, here it is. Apologies for that. So this is, I don't know how this got decoupled, but this is a matrix that shows the reporter types along the top and the file names along the side. So agency information, for example, is going to contain every reporter because it contains data required by every reporter type. Agency mode and type of service will only contain data for transit systems that actually, operate their own transit or are building out a transit system. For example, constructing a streetcar mode would be considered a build reporter type and would be included in this file. So more information on reporter type can be found in the NTD reporting manual, but this matrix will hopefully at least be useful for understanding the degree of data reported by each type. All right, and apologies again that this got misplaced. I'm going to back up for a moment, and we'll go into the key components by type. So we're finally getting to the part that's hopefully a little bit more meaningful. Hopefully I haven't lost too many of you. Again, if you do have questions, submit them in the Q&A. I'm not seeing many so far, but hopefully that just means it's been simple up to this point. So key data publication components by type. For all NTD files, we encourage you to leverage the README and metadata to better understand the product. Also to be aware of the level of granularity. We've already talked about mode and type of service. Sometimes things are drilled down to that level. So one record or one row does not represent an entire transit system. It's just potentially just one mode that larger system includes. So this is an example here of metadata from the file. It's also going to tell you for some of the open data files, or for all of them, the data type. So that's important to many of you. We'll take a look at that in more detail later. So all files, except for the data files, have that database files have that information built in. As I mentioned earlier, there's a dictionary complement to this product. This is also going to provide that applicability information. Like I mentioned, reduced reporters do not report monthly data. For the annual data that's in the database files, we have the same type of information in this last column called exceptions or null handling. So you can see here in the example, condition assessment. This is facilities for which the agency has not yet produced a condition assessment. That's a case where the reporting requirement doesn't apply. Facilities for which the agency has no capital responsibility will show up as an NA in the product. So this is also giving you a little bit of instruction on how to interpret nulls when you see them? Is it a result of someone not reporting because they didn't have to, or should it be interpreted basically the same way as a zero, where we just don't have that information, or we can assume that it's zero? So definitely encourage you to use this file to answer some of those questions. Yeah, just mentioned null handling. Also, averaging can be challenging. Some of the files that we're going to go over will have averages presented. So it would not be appropriate to, when you are trying to derive like a national total average, to just sum up those averages and divide by the count. You'd get an average of averages. I think that's a familiar concept to many of you, but just pointing out that we do have those there. We try and also always include the data we would need to produce or derive that average. And then finally, so for the safety and monthly ridership, those are, like I said, put out on a more agile basis. You should expect changes to the most recent 2 calendar years worth of data in those files. Typically by the end of the year, we're about wrapped up with that. So, you should not expect a lot of changes, for example, the 2022 data on either the monthly ridership or safety and security side. If you are seeing, those totals, especially in time series or some of the details in the safety reports, change and it looks unusual, we'd encourage you to contact the help desk and confirm. But 2023, on the other hand, is still very volatile. We don't recommend, considering that final until we've ended 2023, especially if you're aggregating up, obviously, to the full report year. But even data reported on a monthly data can vary. So a transit system can find that an error occurred during their annual validation process for 2023 and realize that they need to go back and correct the monthly data as well. So for some systems that can be as early as early on this year. We don't see that very often, but it could occur. Okay, so for annual data, as I mentioned, there's the annual data publications guide that has a link here. And I'll also open that up later, but that describes the database population for the year. It describes each annual product type, and it clarifies differences between files containing similar data. So this is a frequent question we get, or what are the relations between files that seem to have the exact same thing in them? And there's a section here that attempts to address that. So especially in the comparing the time series to annual reporting, annual data products can raise questions. This should put any of those to rest. There's a table that compares totals between the files and explains why a total, a national total might look a little bit different in one file than it does in the other. This is what I glossed over earlier. So there are 28 annual database files for report year 2022. These are now live on the FDA's NTD program website. The header to this one provides the link. If you need it, we will also put it in the chat. But basically, you'll filter the product type here to annual database and the data product year to 2022. Click apply, and that will give you the result set of those 28 files. These are the files that contain, again, like I said earlier, all data. They are exported from the database in Excel format for usability. They can be converted to CSV. Some of the date formatted data won't work as well, kind of depending on what you're used to do in terms of data type handling. You might want it in a CSV file. For instance, if you're reading into some data processing software, you might prefer that format. So it can be converted, but because this is another frequent request, we go ahead and publish this out in XLSX form. Below is a cross-section of the service database file, just as an example. So here you can see what I was talking about earlier, where the grain of reporting is going to differ. And I know it's a little bit small, so bear with me, but the time period column is what highlights this. So you can see that the Snohomish County Public Transportation Benefit Area Company, that's a full reporter, and the time period column has all of the, we call them weekly time periods that would be required to enter data for this reporter. So they're going to have average typical weekday, average typical Saturday, and average typical Sunday data all filled in. So that can actually differ by the reporter type and by the mode. Vanpool mode is not required to fill in the midday or PM peak data. Is not a fixed route mode, but it is required to contain some of this data for service begins, service ends, the average passenger car miles. You can see on the right there in column P, average passenger car revenue miles. In column, I'm sorry, vehicle revenue miles, not passenger car, for a Vanpool mode in column Q. And then in contrast, the Chickaloo Native Village, you can see that in the following line. And the reporter type in column D is a reduced reporter. A reduced reporter is only required to submit an annual total. It's not required to submit average weekday data. So if I'm interested in just the annual total here, I can filter column I on time period. But the point of this is really to show you that that's tedious and it's easy to make a mistake here. So the data tables are what will save you that work. The database file documentation is also where to go, as I mentioned earlier, the dictionary reference. If you select data dictionary, questionable items from the side, the data categories here, you'll see that dictionary, and you'll also see a file called questionable data items. These are data items with values that are deemed questionable, for which a uniform reporting requirement is waived by FTA. So you may want to filter out the data value there depending on the context. This is also something that we're hoping the data tables will help you do. And basically the reason can vary widely for why FTA marked or deemed a data point questionable. But it's to flag it for your awareness so that you can consider, well, in context, does this really seem invalid or just not usable for the analysis that I'm doing? Okay, so the data tables. Data contained in the annual data tables is summarized and aggregated versions of the database files. And FTA has been producing them since early in the program. These are the basic data sets that are going to aggregate or summarize that data. So there's a new Canvas format coming soon for the 2022 data tables. We expect that will be released this week. So starting with the annual report here, 2022, the data tables will basically look like this, and we'll go into one in just a moment. One benefit of using the open data portal to host these is the Socrata API. And Socrata is just the branding of the open data portal tool. And this is one benefit of kind of having this data management system is connecting with the API endpoint. So you can do that as a JSON or JSON, depending on how your preference is to pronounce that, and CSV endpoint. So if you're writing a Python script, for example, this would be your starting point for accessing the given NTD data table. There is a link here to a getting started page for consumers who want to ingest the data that way. And again, we encourage you to ask us questions if you're using that. Definitely interested in user experience, since this will be the first time that that feature is available for many of these products. Another new attribute of the annual data publications in 2022 is summaries. So these are reports that we have produced that allow for more interaction or drill down with the NTD data. So here's an example below where it's a count of transit employees, and you can see that's reported by full reporters, where you can drill down from the mode, and it's organized by the count of employees and the specific functions within the transit agency. You can drill down to view part versus full time. So clicking on one of the little boxes will pop out, or will drill down into full or part time and provide you that count on the y-axis. We'll look at this as well. Filtering is another thing that is another capability that will be allowed or afforded using these summaries. And then finally, exporting. The summaries can be exported in a table format, so you can preserve the underlying data that you're using after you have filtered the data. Okay, so the annual time series, I mentioned this earlier. Key data points by category is really what we're summarizing here. So for example, the operating and capital funding time series do the work of totaling up the operating expenses and capital expenses reported by the transit agency in the given year, which otherwise is only available, I guess is not available as an annual total, or is, but with some certain caveats. So this is where you go if you're interested in just overtime, how much has the transit system changed, how consistent have things stayed. Some of the key data points that you might be looking for here are ridership, like unlinked passenger trips. That will be in the TS2 series 2.1 and 2.2. Capital expenditures, as I mentioned, and by type. So whether it was applied to rehabilitate or improve existing capital assets within the agency, or if it's to expand transit service. That's the function of time series 3.1. Time series 4.1 will contain high-level information on the asset inventory. So the number of active vehicles used to provide service is an example there, or the average age of the fleet over time for a given transit agency will be provided there. So again, very useful for a system by system, or in the case of TS 2.1, it's mode by mode time series analysis. Rural reporters are included in the time series when feasible. So rural reporting in the NTD began in 2007. I think the level of detail aligned pretty well starting around 2014 for rural reporters, in terms of being on par with what a reduced reporter would have submitted. So that's how it will appear in the time series. I mentioned the transit agency profiles. So these profiles contain key data points for individual transit agencies. They allow for easy visual comparisons along those key statistics and performance metrics. This is the interface for the profiles here. You're encouraged to type in the name of the agency or the NTD ID in the keyword in order to locate the profile. The 2022 report year profiles have not yet been released. This is also something we expect will happen within the next week or so. So be checking back within the week if you have been waiting on that information. It will be coming soon. I know if it's delayed much longer, I think FTA intends to put like a notice on the web page, just along those lines, to check back in early November. This is an example of a profile. So access services here in near Los Angeles, they're basically providing a lot of the demand response service around the Los Angeles area. You can see they have a demand response mode here. You can see the trends in operating expenses per vehicle mile, revenue mile along the bottom there in those line graphs. Towards the right, you'll see their 2021 breakout for the operating and capital funding. In 2022, we expect the profile to look very similar. There are some slight formatting updates, but all of the same data contained in the profile. So this is just a great, it's a wealth of information if you're interested in a specific area or in a specific transit provider. It kind of pulls from the various database files and tables if you're not looking at like one specific data category, or module of reporting. This is where to go to get the basics. The single summary of transit report is also a new data publication that was just released by FTA. This presents and summarizes transit data in an easy to read format. It's going to present key trends over the last decade. A similar report, the National Transit Summaries and Trends, was previously published. This report basically takes its place as the successor. Pardon me. Then the monthly ridership data. This is where we're going to next. I got a note that the link does not work. Sorry about that. We will provide the link in the chat to the Socrata Data Consumers portal. Thank you, Amanda, just did that. This is going to cover at a very high level, because we are short on time, the functions of the monthly ridership data set. So the monthly ridership is reported on the MR20 form, as I mentioned, by full reporters each month. It includes vehicle revenue miles, vehicle revenue hours, unlinked passenger trips, and vehicles operated in maximum service for the given transit agency, mode, and month. There are two files here, as you'll see in this interface here in this grid here: raw monthly ridership and complete with adjustments and estimates. So the difference there is the raw monthly ridership makes no adjustments when data is reported late, and no estimates when data is reported late, and no historical adjustments. Whereas the complete file fills in, it attempts to estimate the missing data, and it also back adjusts when major changes in data collection methodology have occurred. I believe that should say back or forward adjusts, depending on what the change is. All of the changes to back adjustments are described on the README file. And that's really done, again, for trend analysis, to make it a little bit easier on users when a major change happens and a transit agency finds, for example, they have been undercounting or overcounting data just due to faulty software or something, and has made the FTA aware about that. Then that's when this will be important. Faulty software could also be modernization. There are a variety of reasons why this could occur. The summary tab is also useful. So this is going to present the annual totals from the most recent report year for the given agency. So we see here King County Metro's passenger miles from their fiscal year 2022, their unlinked passenger trips. So that's included in the monthly ridership file for convenience. As I mentioned, this is the only case where the year here means fiscal year and not calendar year. So in this case, we actually have, in this snapshot at the bottom, we have calendar months. And that's how the monthly ridership time series is organized. The safety and security time series, so there are two different time series, and then there's just a pointer to the open data portal here if you follow this link. The functions of the the pointer, the data that appears on data.transportation.gov is basically to provide a basis for understanding the counts in the time series. So it's presenting all the detail available for the safety and security events. And it allows for deeper analysis on things like date, location, weather, hazard type. The function of the monthly modal time series, which is another data set hosted on the open data portal, is basically to allow for aggregation of safety data, but on the monthly level, and combine non-major and major events with very little transformation, unlike the safety time series, which we'll talk about in a moment. So the threshold adjusted time series does exactly that. The threshold adjusted safety time series will basically adjust for historical changes to reporting thresholds, or which are what defines what is a major event, an event that must be reported to the NTD with certain details attached, and what is a non-major event. So FTA's data collection for these events has changed over time. This table is also in the README information, and it's kind of a nice way to understand, what the change was and when it occurred. Okay, the major safety events time series. So this is only going to present counts of major events, which require the more detailed reporting. So this is these are events that have involved for a security event. They may have involved an injury. So there's a crime with an injury, or there are multiple injuries from some other safety event, like a collision, or a fatality has occurred. There are a number of other thresholds. We would encourage you to look at the README information to understand more about. The event summary by year is useful within these time series. So this is going to provide the not only the annual totals, but also normalize those totals by event rates. So if you're interested in nationally the rate of major events over time, you can see that here in this tab. So there are a couple of improvements we made recently. We want to go over these before the demonstration just to kind of call attention to them. For annual publications in 2022, we migrated the data tables to an open data format. So as you'll see in a moment, the inaugural single summer of transit report. So as I mentioned earlier, the successor to the national transit summaries and trends, this report is going to show, I think, a few more useful angles of how to interpret trends in public transportation. Namely, it introduces the concept of transit markets, and it also introduces the concept of capacity equivalent vehicle revenue miles, which is a way to understand, the service supplied in terms of like using the bus mode in a given area as the baseline. And then track and roadway age distribution. So there's a standardized calculation now for track miles over time. There's a little bit more information about what that changes in the data publications guide. And finally, there will be metrics presented in terms of the visuals in the transit agency profiles. Future developments are on the right side of this slide. So the additional improvements to data summaries is something we're very interested in. Definitely appreciate feedback on the data summaries in their first year of use. And then the new data, such as geographic area coverage for demand response service. So that's a new data collection effort. And then the transit worker assault data for reduced reporters will also be a new data collection effort with data tentatively released next fall. To monthly publications, there have been several recent improvements. I'm not going to go over these for the sake of time. They are also listed. Most of these are related to the safety time series. One major change to the safety time series recently is that the data have been consolidated into a single tab with year as a column. So feedback we consistently got from various data users was the time series was getting too long, so it had a one tab per year, and now users will just be able to view organized by agency mode and type of service. They'll be able to view the data across years on the same tab. And hopefully that also will make it a little easier to ingest for those of you who are producing time series in a single visual. Many future improvements. One upcoming improvement will be the incorporation of the weekly reference week reporting data. So that's a new data collection effort that has already started for a sample of NTD reporters. And that can be used for an earlier approximation of the national total ridership in a given month. Okay, so we are at the portion where we've got a brief demonstration planned, and this is just to, in practice, show how useful the data products can be for answering a question. And it's definitely like a more of a journey that we want to take at this point. Appreciate you all sticking with us. I see about 90% of the folks we started with. So if you stuck on till this point, thank you. I do want to also provide time if we need it now, and I'll defer to Lori on whether we do need it to answer questions.
The Q&A box?
Yeah, if we had a lot of questions coming in, which it doesn't look like we do, I just wanted to make sure we provided time to answer them. And we don't really have a poll prepared, but I'm curious too, if folks are really interested in the demonstration, we can just go right into that.
I can set up a poll real quick if you want, or we could just ask people to put a symbol in the chat. I mean, or 1, 2, and 3 in the chat.
That would work great. So
that'd be quicker.
Poll in the chat, 1 for demo or 2 for Q&A if we have a lot of questions.
All right. We're just gonna eyeball it. I'm seeing nothing but ones.
all ones. Okay, that's great. That's great. Okay.
There is not anything but one in there.
Great. Todd and Amanda will continue to monitor the chat, and I didn't see many questions come in, so we'll hopefully get back to those before the end or in the Q&A pod. All right.
Okay.
So I'm going to move into this demonstration. So we have a prompt here to find data related to passenger miles traveled. So this is both for a specific mode and for a specific agency. So if someone wants to give me the name of an agency or the NTD ID number, if you have one, I'll go with that. I'll go with the first one I see in the chat. Or I will pick one at random based on the names here. I see 50032 in the chat, Paul Matter. Thank you. All right, so and I see a few. So I'll have a few examples to work with in case this doesn't work out for 50032. So the first thing we're going to try and do is for 50032, find data related to passenger miles traveled for that specific agency and for a specific mode within the agency. So I'm going to start by pulling up FTA's NTD data portal on the FTA's website. So I can go here to NTD data reports, and I can try and find a data product that I think will contain passenger miles traveled. That's one approach I can use. If I'm interested in pretty current data, let's say I'm going to want to look at 2022 because I know already that passenger miles traveled is only reported annually. It's not on a monthly basis. It's not one of those 4 data points that were listed as the monthly reporting. So I'm going to see what comes back here. And I'm going to see there are lots of files. So let's get more specific. I'm going to actually type in passenger miles traveled here. Sorry for the click clacking. The passenger miles traveled is going to be a keyword for a number of different reports. So I'm going to find, while I have lots of options here, I could probably more easily find this by going to the transit agency profiles and going directly to that agency. Now, as I mentioned earlier, for Mass Transportation Authority 50032, we don't have the 2022 yet, but this will work the same exact way. So if I can zoom in here, I'll be able to pretty quickly locate that. And let's see if I can find it. Assuming that this is a full reporter, which it is. The passenger miles traveled will be under annual passenger miles. And so if I'm looking for a specific mode, demand response, or bus, I've got them right here. 10.6 million for the fixed route bus mode and 3.7 million for the demand response mode. In 2022, we will also have those modes broken out on the time series line graphs down here. So you'll also be able to see for 50032, that trend over time starting a decade ago. So it'll be from 2013 through 2022. There's other ways to find this information, and I'm going to take a different example. So Suresh provided BART as an example. There are a few BARTs I know of, but I'm assuming this is the big one in San Francisco. So I'm going to pull up. This will be the equivalent of the data table for 2022, the service data table. So I'm also aware that the service data table is going to contain, at that base level, the passenger miles traveled. Now, as I mentioned before, there will be summaries of each data table, and that might be more useful, although I could go in this way and view data. There's a nice little canvas that opens here, and I could filter. I could use this to filter down, or I could just export the data set and filter down. But I'm going to go into the summary and see if I can't find this information here. So this is the service summary. And this will basically allow me to type in the name of an agency. So I can type in San Francisco. And I can use agency is, and hopefully that will get me close. San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit. So what I'm left with here are the modes just for BART, and I can see 514 million is BART's heavy rail system, HR, in 2022, and then the other modes here, hybrid rail here, 7.8 million. So that's another way you can discover this pretty quickly. Again, I mentioned there's this canvas here. You could export this. You could use the filters here before exporting. It's kind of whatever your preference is. You could also, if you're really savvy, go into that developer consumer guide that Amanda shared the link to and actually write they call it a SOAP-WOOL Socrata query to do the same thing in like Python, for example, or some data processing software. I'm not that savvy. I would go and tend to type in something like this where I can search here for the name and click apply. That's actually not the same BART. It's going to be the San Francisco one. I've spent a lot of time on this example. Hopefully I've driven the point home that there are different ways to answer the same question. I got a comment. Can we see the screen? Hopefully everything I was sharing was just now was visible.
I saw it.
Okay, great. All right, I'm going to go to the next prompt then, which is find service data. So this is a little bit more open-ended. I'm not saying passenger miles traveled specifically for vehicle revenue miles and unlinked passenger trips for all NTD reporters. And so that's also pretty open-ended because I'm not specifying a year. So I could do this a couple different ways. Again, I could go into the um, the data portal and I could search just using the service data. Um, bear with me, I'm sorry, it was not on the right screen there. The service data category. So I'm going to get probably too much. I really just want, like I saw earlier, I just want service data um, for all reporters. So I'm thinking those are things like ridership, vehicle revenue miles. So I can go to 2022 and I can look at the time series file and I can see, oh, there's a time series, a couple of time series files. Maybe I should start there because those are likely to include all transit agencies, all transit systems. And sure enough, if I download one of these, I'm not only going to see the all transit systems. Oh, let's see if I haven't already. I'm also going to see the national total. And bear with me, I thought I had this already. Don't know why it's doing that. I'm so sorry. Well, on the fly, let's see if I can find it even another way. So that's that time series you can open, like I said, and it will have the totals aggregated. In the data summaries, there is also a um, a totaling feature at the very bottom. So if we were looking here at the same data summary we were earlier, and I just remove the filter that I just applied. Oh, and I remove it up here as well from agency. Then I should see the national aggregate at the very bottom. So all NTD reporters, their service data, vehicle revenue miles, for example, vehicle revenue hours, unlinked passenger trips, can be easily found here in this table. Directional route miles, train revenue miles. So those are some of the key features. If I want to look at the underlying data, I can just go into export data and that will give me everything. There's also some narrative here that highlights some of the same key total statistics. All right, so hopefully I handled prompt number 2 as effectively as possible, given my own self-induced snafu there. Let's see. So the final prompt here is to find injuries and fatalities for 2022. So for this, I would, using the same logic as I did a moment ago, I would pull up the NTD data web, FTA's NTD data website here, and I would look for safety and security, so monthly safety time series. Now note here that the product year drop down is a little bit finicky. If you click an older year, you're not going to see the data. It's going to just be the most current year that you want to select, or you can just leave it blank in order to come back with that time series. So I didn't really specify what whether I'm looking at only major events or all events. So I'm going to assume I want the threshold adjusted. If I was only interested in major events, which again meet a major reporting threshold, I'd go to the other one. But then I would download this one. And this one, hopefully I'm not going to have the same problem. This one looks like it's actually opening. As we mentioned earlier in the presentation, has a very useful summary tab here. And the summary tab will have mode totals. It will also have a national total, which I think is just total. So if I'm looking for all fatalities and injuries that were reported in 2022, I can go to total. I see here 2023, so I'm cognizant that 2023 is still routinely updated. 2022 may yet have changes, but as we discussed earlier, they should be very, very minor and insignificant in terms of their relation to the national total. Of course, no event here is insignificant, but 18,000 is my total injuries, and total fatalities I already skipped, but it is 338. So that's a quick way to find them. The data tab is going to have by transit system, as we mentioned earlier, and by year, and by mode and type of service, all of the event counts. Now, if I'm looking for more detail on this data, that is where I would go back to the open data portal. I might also want to use the monthly modal time series to kind of back into the same answer. So this is what I've done there, and I really should get the same totals when I aggregate across all the modes here, but this is a by year and by mode grouping using this kind of Canvas Explorer down here. Now I can also pick, with this one, I can pick which columns I'm interested in so that the file isn't as wide. And when I group by something, it does that for me, but I could take these groupings off and reapply, and this gets me back to the whole data set. And then I can choose again which columns I want to see for a given safety reporting total. All right, that is about it. We do have the resources identified here that we talked about, the FAQ page. Will hopefully help answer some questions. Excuse me. I would encourage you to just go to transit.dot.gov/NTD and browse around if you're looking for more detail on other kind of related topics. But that again is all we have. Our contact information is here. We will take live questions. I know there's not much time for it. I think we have until 3:30. Lori, correct me if I'm wrong.
You are correct. We do have about 15 minutes or so.
All right. And again, thank you all so much.
So there's no open questions. We can wait and see. I can post a link in the chat to take an evaluation for this session. We appreciate your feedback. If you don't have time now, I'm going to send an email and the link will also be in there. So choice is yours. Let me grab that link. So if you want to do it now, you can while we're waiting.
We got another vote for one at the very end here. I don't know if that means there's something more you want us to demo, but that could be how we use the remaining time if someone's interested in something. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but the help desk email is there if you do think of something later or have any difficulty finding data that you're expecting to.
I'll wait in case anyone is typing frantically, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot.
Might be already.
Thank you, Yvonne. If you know, you know.
If you know, you know. Yep, either you're thinking or you're already trick-or-treating. So well, thank you.
All right, I guess we'll let everybody go and start eating candy until they vomit. Or maybe that's just me. Thank you, everyone. You have all the email addresses. You have my email address because I'm the one sending you the emails about the session. I'll send out the link again for the survey. Thank you so much to Joe and Amanda and Todd. We appreciate the time you put in. I know everyone does. And I guess we're done. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for hosting us, Lori.
Anytime. I'll hang out for a minute or two, but everyone's free to go. Happy Halloween.